Job has done this. He has been steadfast with his faith. Every time he talks about his faith. Hey guys, welcome back to Salt and Light. This is our Job series, and this is going to be chapters 11 through 15. If you missed the other videos, go back and watch them because you'll kind of be lost if you start on this video. So I'm pretty sure this is part 3. Alright, so let's get straight into this. Hey guys, I had to film some corrections for this little video, so whenever it switches to this view, this is a different day altogether, but I was going to try to clarify some points that I didn't think I did a very good job with when I filmed the video, so don't be thrown off if I switch to this view and I have this different shirt on. It's no big deal, really. Just don't let it throw you. So we left off where Job was basically wishing he was dead, but he did realize that he needed a mediator. But I want to remind you of what God said about Job in the very beginning in Job chapter 1, because we need to keep this in mind the whole time we're reading Job, because we tend to forget this. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." So right there it tells us that Job is upright. Now what does that mean? I want you to think about animals. They crawl on the ground with all fours, and that was his intention for them, but for us, he intended us to walk on 2 feet, and that's what it means to be upright. Now, whenever we give into sin, he's saying we are like a beast at that point. We've stooped down and decided to start crawling on all fours, and we start thinking like a beast does. This is what our heart is like when we decide to pursue our own passions and not fulfill the Lord's will, which is a perfect and good will. God says that Job is upright and that he is his servant. Now, it's because Job has true faith, and true faith is what drives us to God, and it is what pleases God. So as we continue through this wonderful book of wisdom, let's just keep that in mind because it's really important. Job still says many things he should not have said. However, he is a man of faith, and God says that we are approved if we have faith. Now, since Job has faith, he treats him as a son and not as an enemy. However, at this point, Job is having a hard time seeing that. So Job is feeling the heavy hand of God's chastisement because he's trying to teach him something. But his friends come alongside him and basically make it a lot worse. They make that hand heavier. His friends continue to attack and slander what they do not understand because they can't see what God's doing, but they act like they do know what he's doing. So that's kind of where we left off. His first 2 friends basically said, "You've done wrong, obviously, because look at your state. You wouldn't be in this state, if you were righteous." So we left off there. Now his third friend is going to give his opinion. So we're going to start in Job chapter 11. And this is his friend Zophar. And he said, "If iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and do not let wickedness dwell in your tents. Then indeed you could lift up your face without moral defect, and you would be steadfast and not fear. Your life would be brighter than noonday." So this is basically what Christianity looks like without Christ. It's a rigorous religious effort to try to purify yourself. But God tells us that this is not possible. This is a works-based salvation, but this is not how salvation works at all. Salvation works by imputation. And I'm about to explain what that means, but I'm going to use some Bible verses. We have 1 John chapter 1 verse 5. It says, "This is the message we have heard from him and announced to you, that God is light and in him is no darkness at all." So it says God is light. So God is light. Now let's read the next verse I have here. It's Matthew chapter 19 verse 17. "So he said to him," this is Christ, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. So right here, he's saying there's no one good but God. So God is light, he's the source of light, and he's the source of goodness. Okay, and that's the only place it can be found. All right, our next verse is James chapter 1, verse 17. It says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. All right, so our next verse is Ephesians 2:8. It says, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. So salvation is a free gift attained by grace through faith. So basically, the gift is grace, so it can't be earned. Grace means that there's no earning it. And when it says through faith, that's how the grace is accessed. You have faith in God, you put your trust in Him, and then the gift will be given to you. There is no goodness within us, there is no light within us. It must come from God. The way you access this goodness is you cry out to Him, realize you're a sinner, and ask Him, and He will give it freely. And this is what imputation is. He gives us the coat of righteousness, and we put it on. And then we trust in that. If we don't trust in that, and we start trusting in our works, imputation doesn't happen. But that's the only way it can happen. So we need to be careful of not thinking like Zophar here, thinking that we can make ourselves pure. All right, so in Job chapter 9, we're going back. He talks about, he realizes he needs a mediator. It says, nor is there any mediator between us who may lay his hand on us both. Let him take his rod away from me, and do not let dread of him terrify me. Then I would speak and not fear him. But it is not so with me. So Job has the right idea, Zophar doesn't. So another good verse that goes with this is 1 John chapter 4, verse 18 says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. So whenever you have really strong faith that Christ has accomplished this, and you totally believe it, you're not going to fear the Lord. So there's two different types of fear. One type of fear is a fear that a Christian has, is more of a reverent fear for a father that you would have for like your dad when you were, younger. Now the fear that a non-saved person has, he has a fear of God as a judge that can send him to prison. Totally different fears, but we're still supposed to fear God regardless. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. Because if you have 100% belief that that is true, you have no reason to fear, because you're not going to be punished. He has taken the rod away from you. Now, Job chapter 12, and this is Job responding to Zophar. Truly then, you are the people, and with you wisdom will die. Now this is sarcasm. He's saying once you guys die, nobody's going to have a chance of getting any wisdom anymore, because you took it all with you when you died. Alright, so he continues, he says, but I have intelligence as well as you. I am not inferior to you. And who does not know such things as these? He who is at ease holds calamity in contempt. That's a fancy way of saying that's easy for you to say, because you aren't the one with the problem. And a good example of this is if you ever hear soon-to-be parents, usually they'll say, oh, I'm going to be a wonderful mom or dad, I'm going to do this or that. And they'll look at people with kids and say, man, they're doing a cruddy job, aren't they? And then when you ask the actual parents, they'll say, oh, you'll see, it's a lot harder than you think. So he continues, he says, the tents of the destroyers prosper, and those who provoke God are secure. But now ask the beasts, and let them teach you, or speak to the earth, and let it teach you. and let the fish of the sea declare to you. Who among these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this, in whose hand is the life of every living thing? With him are wisdom and might. Behold, he tears down, and it cannot be rebuilt. He's saying, look, you guys are so dumb, y'all have to have the animals teach you. They know more than y'all do. Let me read Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 7. This is the prophet Jeremiah talking about the same type of thing. He says, even the stork in the sky knows her appointed seasons, and the dove, the swift, and the thrush observe the time of their migration. So these are instincts that were put into animals by God, and he's saying they obey what God has put in them. He continues, but my people do not know the requirements of the Lord. Remember, he made people upright. He gave them a conscience. He gave them a moral duty to carry out. And we do not obey our conscience. We suppress it in unrighteousness because we love our sins. So we're going to go back to the last thing he said, because I think he made another really good point here. He said, with him are wisdom and might. Behold, he tears down, and it cannot be rebuilt. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 14, it says, I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it, that men should fear before him. There's a couple examples I could give you of this. Death cannot be reversed. It is inevitable. It happens to everybody. It doesn't matter how much money you spend on health products. You're still going to die eventually. Another example of this in the Bible is the Tower of Babel. In this story, we all had one language, and we basically decided to build this massive tower to heaven and make a name for ourselves. And God did not approve of this, so he decided to change the languages. He basically confused everybody's speech so they couldn't understand each other and they couldn't finish this tower. This is something that he did a long time ago, and to this day, it remains that way, and man could do nothing to change it. Now we're moving into chapter 13. And this is Job still, so it hasn't switched to a friend or anything. He says, what you know I also know. I am not inferior to you, but I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to argue with God. This is not good. Job is wanting to argue his righteousness to God. He wants to go and defend himself. Now, Isaiah chapter 45 verse 9 says, woe to the one who quarrels with his maker, an earthenware vessel among the vessels of earth. Will the clay say to the potter, what are you doing? Now in our last video we discussed that Job is an infant in the faith, and he has things he needs to learn, and this suffering is supposed to teach him those things. We are not to argue with our maker. Quick clarification here. When we have issues with obstacles in our lives and we start questioning God's methods, or if we think we don't deserve what's happening to us, this is actually displaying a lack of trust in God's works. Instead, we need to pray that God would fill us with his strength so we could endure the trial. So let's continue. It says, but you, talking to his friends, smear with lies. You are all worthless physicians. Oh, that you would be completely silent, and that it would become your wisdom. Will you speak what is unjust for God, and speak what is deceitful for him? Will it be well with you when he examines you? He will surely reprove you if you secretly show partiality. So he's basically saying if you had an ounce of wisdom that God gives, you would just be quiet. In our last video, we covered the wisdom of God versus the wisdom of man and how vast the difference is. And people who know God know that they should not speak for him. Sorry, guys. We can speak for God. That's what we're meant to do. That's why he tells us to go and spread the gospel and to spread truth, and we're supposed to be a light to the world. What I was trying to say here is God doesn't like us to take his name in vain and use his name to support an ungodly idea or to support something evil. So we should be real guarded and take great care when we go to speak in the name of the Lord, to make sure we say everything in truth, because he does not look kindly on us supporting lies with his name. So Christians, if we read our Bibles daily, this type of trespass will be avoided easily. Or argue with him or anything like that, because he's sovereign and he does these things for a purpose. We are supposed to just accept his will and submit to his will. So his friends here are being very presumptuous. They're assuming what God is trying to do and just declaring it like that's the fact, when it's not. So Job says, will it be well with you when he examines you? I'm going to read Proverbs chapter 30. That kind of goes with that. It says, do not malign a servant to his master, lest he curse you, and you be found guilty. There is a generation that is pure in its own eyes, yet is not washed from its filthiness. There is a generation whose teeth are like swords, and whose fangs are like knives, to devour the poor from off the earth, and the needy from among men. So this is a perfect description of Zophar here. This is Zophar's belief. He believes that he can make himself pure, and we know that because that's his advice to Job. We give the advice that we believe. Zophar is what the Bible would define as a blind man. He sees himself as above the law, when in reality, he's below the law just like everybody else. If you put yourself above the law, you're putting yourself in the place of God. And who wanted to do that at the very beginning? Satan. So he's showing his true colors here. He's a child of Satan, and that's what the rest of that verse went on to describe. Teeth like swords, fangs like knives, and Satan is described as a lion, roaming the earth, seeking whom he may devour. So Job was saying to Zophar, he will surely reprove you if you secretly show partiality. And I'm going to give you a quick definition of what partiality is. It's basically showing favoritism to one person over the other for reasons that shouldn't even be in your consideration. For example, if you have a poor man and a rich man, you'll give favor to the rich man because you view both of them not as souls, but as just bags of money. Which one's bigger? Which one can serve my flesh more? Well, I'll give him special treatment. I'll give the rich man special treatment, so I could get something out of the deal. This is another example of reducing somebody to an object. In Proverbs chapter 6, verse 26, it says, for by means of a harlot a man is reduced to a crust of bread, and an adulteress will prey upon his precious life. So this is true in adulterous relationships as well. One or both of them will reduce the other one to just a piece of bread that they can consume, satisfy their flesh temporarily, and that's extremely evil, to just devour somebody's life just so you'll be satisfied. Alright, so in James chapter 2 it says, have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil motives? And that was referring to partiality as well. So let's go back to Job chapter 13 and we'll continue in what he was saying here. He says, though he slay me, I will hope in him. This also will be my salvation, for a godless man may not come before his presence. This right here is a statement of faith, and all throughout Job's monologues or dialogues is statements of faith. That's where his approval from God rests, and you see that all throughout his speech. He says, why do you hide your face and consider me your enemy? You put my feet in the stocks and watch all my paths. You set a limit for the soles of my feet, while I am decaying like a rotten thing, like a garment that is moth-eaten. So this part I paid special attention to, because later on in the book of Job, he is rebuked for this right here, this exact line. But what he's saying here is, Lord, you're being overly rigorous just to me, Everybody else you're letting off the hook. It's only me that you're being super hard on. Now when he says you put my feet in the stocks, you can think of like a ball and chain. And then he says you set limits for the soles of my feet. You can think of that like a leash. So he's saying you got me in a ball and chain and you got me on a leash. I can only go so far. And you're being just overly rigorous just to me. He sees God as doing this to him right now, but truth is he was like that since birth, and God is breaking the chains. God is the one who cuts the leash, frees you, but to us, we don't see it that way. We see it as, oh, this terrible thing has happened to me, and God, why? Why have you done this? But there's good purposes in suffering, because the ending of a thing is better than the beginning of a thing. That's what Ecclesiastes says, and it can definitely relate to what we're talking about. Now we're moving on to Job chapter 14. Job's still speaking, so he got 3 good chapters here. And here's the last one. Who can make the clean out of the unclean? No one. Since his days are determined, turn your gaze from him, that he may rest until he fulfills his day like a hired man. For there is hope for a tree when it is cut down, that it will sprout again. At the scent of water it will flourish, and put forth sprigs like a plant. And right here he's referring to resurrection. He's saying at the scent of water, the root that died in the ground will spring back to life. And water always represents the Spirit of God. We see it in the flood of Noah. When God's Spirit is totally poured out in his wrath, it causes total destruction. And then Jesus says that he's the living water and he refreshes. So water can be helpful or hurtful. It can drown you or it can refresh you. It can keep you alive or it can kill you. Let me go back to the first thing he said. He said, who can make the clean out of the unclean? This is another way of saying who can reverse what God has done. God has made us unclean, so who can reverse it? He's basically saying man can't, but God can. So he continues, he says, but man dies and lies prostrate. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol. Quick explanation of Sheol. Sheol is just the place of the dead. That can be good or bad. It's just a generic place where you go when you die. Alright, so let's continue. It says, that you would conceal me until your wrath returns to you. And what he's talking about is his current circumstance in which he desires death because of the intense calamity that he's having to go through. Death would be better than living through these agonizing trials. He is asking God to end the hurt. All the destruction, the death, the lament, all the tears, all those things will be ended in God's presence. And this is what Job desires. So after he says this, he then gives a really good statement of faith. So let's read that. He says, that you would set a limit for me and remember me. All the days of my struggle, I will wait until my change comes. So that phrase, remember me, what does that make you think of? Does it make you think of the thief on the cross? Because that was a statement of faith that Jesus said, I accept. Luke chapter 9, verse 23. That's not it. Luke 23, verses 42 and 43. Then he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, assuredly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. So there's the thief's statement of faith, and then Jesus says, I've accepted that. Pretty awesome. So after his statement of faith, he continues, but the falling mountain crumbles away, and the rock moves from its place. Water wears away stones, its torrents wash away the dust of the earth. So you destroy man's hope. You forever overpower him, and he departs. Remember, water in the Bible represents God's Spirit, and we are dust. Genesis tells us that God formed us from the dirt. Now, hopefully these little tidbits will help you understand this passage better. So he's saying God's wrath is evident by what we see on earth. Our death is evidence. We have evidence of storms, disasters, tornadoes, tsunamis. Those are all evidence of God's wrath that we can see. And creation is supposed to teach us things about God, and it shows us that we are corrupt and he is holy. So for that reason, I want to read you Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 2. It says, "It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart." It's better to focus more on your death than on the pleasures of sin. The pleasures of sin will blind you to the reality of God's wrath. Learn to number your days. It is a much wiser thing to do, because then you'll consider your eternity and consider who God is. Alright, so now Eliphaz steps back up to the plate. This was his first friend that stepped up first, back in chapter something. But this is his second attempt to speak with Job. So let's read it. Chapter 15. "Should he argue with useless talk, or with words which are not profitable? Indeed, you do away with reverence, and hinder meditation before God." Now, when he says you do away with reverence, that's basically saying you're casting off the fear of the Lord. And he's right. Job did do this. However, Job confessed that he had done this back in Job chapter 6, which I'm going to read to you. Job says to his friends, "A despairing man should have the devotion of his friends, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty." Now keep that in mind. He said, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty, so he's acknowledging that he did. Let's read 1 John chapter 1 verse 9. It says, "If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness." So this is a man of faith that confessed his sins. Now he's saying that your meditations are hindered. He's talking about prayer. But what hinders prayer? We're going to read a couple verses and find out. Psalm chapter 66 verse 18. "If I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened." James chapter 4 verse 3. "You ask and do not receive, because you ask wrongly, to spend it on your passions." So God doesn't listen to your prayers if you're sinning willingly and not confessing them. And he won't listen to you if you ask for the purpose of spending what he gives you on your flesh for your own passions and your own pleasures. What I'm trying to say here is that God doesn't answer self-centered prayers. He hears us when our desire is to bring him honor, glory, and praise. Alright, so Matthew chapter 21 verse 22 also says, "And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith." And we know a true faith will want to please the Lord. And is sin pleasing to the Lord? No. So he's not going to give you stuff that you want to please yourself with. So Job is a man of faith that shuns evil, and God said he was upright. So whenever he's crying out to him, do you think God hears? Do you think his prayers are being hindered? I don't think so. I think God hears him. So his friend here, I think, is wrong. Wrong to assume this. So let's continue with what he's saying. "Your own mouth condemns you, and not I, and your own lips testify against you. Do you hear the secret counsel of God and limit wisdom to yourself?" Now right here, I think Eliphaz is actually getting angry, because Job is not listening to what they have to say. He's saying, basically, y'all are dummies. Y'all don't have the wisdom of God. But Job is not saying he has it, because he's crying out to God, asking for it. So he's basically saying, hey, we're all dummies here. Okay, but that's actually making them angry as he's telling them that. I want to read Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 9. It says, "Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools." Now, we all get angry at times, and we all can be fools. We all have been fools. But in this particular situation, his friend would be the fool here. So he keeps going, "What do you know that we do not know? Both the gray-haired and the aged are among us, older than your father. What is a man that he should be pure, or who is born of woman that he should be righteous?" Okay, so right here I want to point out, he thinks that just because you have gray hair, you're wise. But I want to disprove that with another verse from Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 13 says, "Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning." So we know wisdom comes from God. So which is better, an old man who's never cracked the Bible, never prayed to God, always depended on himself, or would it be better to be a youth who is saved, who has read the Bible and has the Holy Spirit? There will be more wisdom in the youth. It's good to listen to your elders, but that doesn't mean that they're wise. Then he says, what is man that he should say he is pure? This is what Job is doing. However, we know that faith does make us pure by God's giving of righteousness. So Job's issue here is he's defending his righteousness a little too hard, and then Zophar is erring by saying you're not righteous when he's talking about a man of faith. Now he makes the pronouncement. He makes the judgment. And remember, these type of people think they're above the law. They think they're on par with God so that they can pronounce judgment. Okay? He says, "The wicked man writhes in pain all his days, and numbered are the years stored up for the ruthless. While at peace the destroyer comes upon him, because he has stretched out his hand against God and conducts himself arrogantly against the Almighty. He will not become rich, nor his wealth endure. Let him not trust in emptiness, deceiving himself, for emptiness will be his reward." So he basically said, Job, that's the answer. That is what God is doing to you. Does he know this for sure? No, because that's not what's going on. I also want to point out that he says he will not become rich and his wealth will not endure. However, we know that the wicked also prosper and the righteous suffer. He also accuses Job of trusting in emptiness. Eliphaz sees Job's faith and he's like, Job, you shouldn't have faith. Look around you. If you take all this evidence into consideration, your belly is empty, your hands are empty, and your lands are empty. You are trusting in emptiness. You should be doubting, not trusting. He's saying if you still hold your faith, you are a fool. You're trusting in emptiness. Eliphaz is suggesting that Job's faith can only be valid if God gives Job earthly securities, and he's saying that is proof that your faith is valid if those things occur. And Job pointed that out. So right here, Eliphaz is reinforcing the prosperity gospel, which is what he believes. Alright, so that was chapters 11 through 15. I'm going to conclude with a verse from 1 Peter chapter 3 and 1 Peter chapter 5. It says, "And who is he who will harm you if you become followers of what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. And do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled, but sanctify the Lord in your hearts." What that is saying is we need to hold the Lord in super high esteem. We need to see him as holy. This is something Job's having a hard time with. You know, understandably, he's in immense pain, but it's not a wise thing to do. It goes on, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear, having a good conscience, that when they defame you as evildoers, those who revile your good conduct in Christ may be ashamed. For it is better, if it is the will of God, to suffer for doing good rather than doing evil. So what Job is having a hard time with doing is holding God in the right esteem, and he's elevating himself. And this is what he needs to learn not to do. But if it's the will of God that you suffer, it's better to suffer for doing good rather than evil, because if you do good, you'll be rewarded for it one day. But if you do evil and suffer, you're not really going to get anything from that. And it's not really going to benefit you at all. 1 Peter chapter 5 says, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, steadfast in the faith," which Job has done this. He has been steadfast with his faith. Every time he talks about his faith. "Knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world." So when we humble ourselves and cast all our cares on the Lord and trust him fully with everything, every situation, no matter what, he says in due time, he will exalt you and you will be with him forever. All right, so that was our third installment, and I just hope that if you haven't seen the others, you'd go back and watch those, and try to have the next video out in the next week, hopefully. I hope to see you guys then, so hope y'all have a good day.